I going to be on the internet? Am I famous?
You are internet famous. This is this week's Hang-Ups. We're just doing an open session this week, kind of hanging out, if it were, and figured we'd just kind of throw it out to the group, hear what people are working on, with it being the second week of the new year, and yeah, I guess I will start because it's an easy thing. So I am leaving or have left the community team at Chef and am now I've taken on the role of engineering lead for a team we're calling corporate infrastructure or corporate applications and infrastructure. So in some ways I am still very opsy, in other ways I'm leading devs. So I'm not entirely sure how that works, but we're going with it.
I just like how it's called CIA.
Yeah, I keep meaning to like go find a copy of Photoshop and like do up a logo for my team just because that will be hilarious. I haven't decided whether I'm going to show up to ChefConf in a suit and tie with the little earpiece, or whether like I should go like the opposite direction and get like the go get like tactical pants and get the like the big vest that has the big saying across the big words across the back that says CIA like the FBI has.
Oh, that's awesome. Either way is just perfect.
So, how about you, Jake? What are you working on this week?
Oh man, well it's Friday, so I'm loving that. But right currently, my favorite project that I'm working on is I'm working on a whole bunch of kitchen puppet stuff. So we're starting to test all of our infrastructure and all of our puppet code in Test Kitchen, and then I'm starting to write a lookup function that will look up Hiera values inside of our tests. So inside of our tests, we can say, hey, Hiera, how many classes do we have? And then test that those classes are actually there.
But with
Hey, JJ, can you mute?
Oh, sorry.
recommendation,
No worries.
knowing that I'm going to need somebody.
Um, nice. So, how are you handling that in Test Kitchen with so like? If my memory serves me correctly, the way Test Kitchen for Puppet worked was it was almost kind of it was still very. I'm going to use a chef term here, so my apologies, but like mono repo style, where like you had all of the modules in the same directory and you launched against that. Does it still
Yeah.
work that way?
Yeah, it still works that way, and that's actually kind of a godsend because that's how our repo is set up. Is we still have the old, one repo style of all of our modules in the same repo, and we can test them. But Edmund Hasselwater, I think just recently, within the past year or so, added functionality to the Kitchen Puppet where you can test the self as module. So if you have a one module, one repo kind of workflow, then you can still test that module as its own inside of Test Kitchen.
That's awesome. I was doing some stuff for PuppetConf, and that's the first thing I did was like, I love me some Test Kitchen, so I pulled down some Test Kitchen and wired it up real fast. It is nice. I'm looking forward to seeing that work continue because, yeah, for my Puppet code, my personal Puppet repo, I should probably wire up Test Kitchen because that would be nice.
It's fun. It's still a heavy work in progress, but the repo has a really good maintainer, and yeah, he's been open to any changes that I've submitted and talked to him about, so it's pretty cool.
Very nice. Do you run into problems like do you use any of the parallelism stuff, or are you just running against one node?
I've started to do parallelism stuff, but for the most part, we're just working on getting testing started. So it's a lot nicer to do it without parallel, so you can see the output of everything.
Yeah.
But we're eventually going to get to the point where we're going to have like continuous integration where every pull request is built and tested and verified before.
Nice. And not just asserting true?
Yeah.
Now, of all the things that I'm kind of excited about from a like change in position or change in role is my support base goes way down. Like when I was working on the community stuff, like it's all the things, right? If you're supporting MySQL, it's across all these different platforms, or the Chef client is cookbook is another good example, and it's just like there's a lot of instances there. In fact, I want to say last time I looked at the Chef Client Cookbook, it's something like 90 instances were required to do a full test suite run. And
Oh wow.
yeah, needless to say, thank you to the DigitalOcean folks for helping us out with instances and whatnot, because like that made a huge difference where you could just be like, oh, we're gonna spin up the world and then destroy it in a few minutes here. So yeah, no, that's for me. That's something I am looking forward to. Is this gets tested on maybe 2 platforms, maybe Ubuntu 12.04 and 14.04, and as we do development, maybe it gets hit against 15.04 or 16.04, whatever ends up being the next major release that we support, that we're running internally for production stuff. So that's something I am kind of looking forward to, is just that reduction in scope when it comes time to building cookbooks and whatnot.
Right. Like for us, it's kind of a double-edged sword where we only have one instance and one suite that we're running against. Like we only have one platform that we have to deal with. But because we have so many modules, it takes so long to provision that host. Whereas if we tested each module individually, you could have a provision that would take maybe 5 minutes at most to test and verify. But since we're spinning up the whole world, it's gonna take a little bit longer.
Well, that comes down to some classical thought on how our original Puppet infrastructure was set up. But the future that we're trying to work towards is very modular and highly targeted, so that the very bare minimum of what is needed to be run is run, rather than deploy the world.
Well, and it's really interesting. So you get into some discussions with folks about and like config management repos. Obviously I'm specifying what I'm about to say is very focused on Puppet and Chef. I don't know enough about Ansible or Salt for it to matter one way or the other. But for like Puppet and Chef, it's really interesting. There's the mono repo where all of your modules or all of your cookbooks are in the same repo, and then on the flip side, there's every module or every cookbook is its own repo, and how that works. And I find it is. I used to say it had to do with maturity. I don't believe that anymore. I think it has to do with the nature of your organization. If you have an ops team and they're the only people messing with that code base, like the single mono repo works amazing.
Actually, no, sorry, Chris, I got to jump in there and say no, that's not always true.
Well, no, I wouldn't say anything is always true, but I think the groups that seem the most successful with the mono repo is when it's a singular organization working on the repo. Or
it's like one guy that's just putting it all together, then.
Yeah, I would think small numbers, a very small group and a very small amount of Puppet code would work just fine in that situation. But I think as you grow and as you become larger, you need a certain amount of that modularity so that you can kind of confine bugs down to a much smaller scale. What we find a lot of is that one small change in one place has these just spider web of consequences across the entire mono repo that you're calling, So
yeah,
what I'm expecting to see as we get more to a modular layout in Puppet is that those bugs become highly isolated to the module that they're in.
Well, for me, in my past
that's
lives,
one way to think.
sorry, I've got someone talking behind me. In my past lives, just to keep my team to always have the same code base, even if it was really small with one repo, and I was only working on one cookbook specifically, to keep all that stuff let's just put it this way, I was working in a team with a bunch of ops guys who didn't really understand development processes. So they didn't understand to always git pull everything
Right.
before doing it. So they would be
Yeah, but
doing really weird kind of just it was a spaghetti mess.
yeah,
And I try using things like Spork and things like that to reiterate these things, but it never ever happened. And that was only a team of 3 people, right? 3 people. I could only imagine anything more than that. And that's why I tried to break the repo out into cookbooks, right? And then have submodules, and that was just crazy. So I don't know what the right answer is. I mean, advice, thoughts, anything?
Well, and I think that there's a couple things right there, right? Like as and I'm just going to say it, as an operations professional, we need to be to level up. We are going to have to learn development practices because, like, it's no longer about going and plugging the drive into the box. It's about building things up as software objects. With that said, it's interesting that you say that you would expect what's the word I'm looking for here? The bugs to be more isolated to the modules. I don't know that. I feel like I actually ran into the problems the other way, where you would make a change in a module that was separate, and it would cause a ripple effect through other modules because of the way that we did or didn't present an API to the other modules. Because I think that's, and in fact, this was my talk at PuppetConf, right, is I don't think we are having enough conversations as operations professionals about the type of API that our modules and our cookbooks present to make it easier for us to kind of grok how change works. We just pass a bunch of crap in and add new parameters on the fly, and it makes it harder to reason about what that change actually is going to do.
Well, there's okay, so I do have a little bit of programming background as a developer, having that job, but what I think I see in a lot of Puppet modules that I've looked at that are available on the Forge is that people don't really think about respecting the API as it was defined. So those APIs change very quickly. When you're writing an application, you define that API, and that API shouldn't change. You can change the functionality inside, you can fix bugs inside, but that fundamental API really shouldn't be changed. So if you're changing the API often, you're going to have bugs that cross modules. My hope is that, my expectation, my hope is that when we start writing our modules as discrete units, we can also apply the other thing from developer land, which is unit testing, right? And get those tests in there so that we can validate that, our code actually does what we expect. Now that still won't cover like the interactions between, but that's what acceptance testing is for, right? Gosh, sorry, let me get my thoughts together. It seems to me like if we were to sit down and write our modules in a modular way with good development practices in mind, right, we would curtail a lot of those cross-module bugs because you respect an API, or because you sit down and think about what the API should be first, and then you respect that API later, right? So I don't know.
Well, and that's I'm kind of bummed that the video from my talk isn't available, but like that's exactly the point, right? Is the way that we learn how to script is, at least I learned how to script in kind of an operationally way, is very different than when you're spending a little bit of time going, oh, well, instead of passing in these 3 things, really these 2 things are mandatory, we always need them, and this one falls into this kind of optional category, so let's just pass in a hash of options that we can loop over later. And sure enough, Redis is a perfect example, right? Where between versions, what set of option hashes, or like what set of options are valid or not valid, good luck. And I feel like it changed like during minor versions, like it was crazy. But it would work really well where you could just pass in an options hash and define a default and then pass and merge that hash and be done with it. I think a lot of it is really we're, and I say we a lot because I'm really thinking of the me that was really started to learn what it meant to be an operations professional in this world where development kind of takes center stage, where you start to look at these patterns and go, oh, this just makes sense. Whereas I think because of the nature of the way we program, you learn those practices because they're taught as part of even just basic programming books.
I do believe that scripting is fundamentally a different skill from programming. The way I learned to program was actually through scripting, like most ops guys, right? And when you make that switch over to doing software development, there's kind of you have to wrap your head around the different ideals, right? So from my point of view, when you're scripting, you are attempting to solve a problem that's right in front of you usually, right? Either you're trying to make it something that you can do over and over again, or you're trying to fix a problem that only has a programmatic solution, right? Something you couldn't do manually, for example. But it's not necessarily future-proof, right? And I think most of the idea behind software development really is to try as much as you can to future-proof that code, so that when your code or when the situation changes, that code should still kind of apply. With a script, it's really very much about the problem that's right in front of you.
That makes sense, and it's actually interesting you put that put it that way, because it's something that, like, as I'm thinking a bit about like my Puppet versus Chef experience, one of the things I've always appreciated about Chef is that I can have multiple versions of you think in terms of versions, not in terms of files on disk when it comes time to Chef. Whereas with Puppet, you're looking at what files are sitting on disk in a directory as to what is my active set of modules. And for me, I think that's been an interesting, just kind of pondering, how does that change the landscape, and how do you think differently about things?
Yeah, no, I could see that. I think I caught most of that while I was typing, sorry.
I'm guilty of that too, so don't worry about it.
I would have jumped out and asked that question, but being my boss is talking behind me, I can't really ask.
Oh, so I will ask it out loud, because that's actually a good point. So what are people's experiences with Puppet RSpec or RSpec Puppet? I always screw it up. In fact, I always do it wrong the first time and have to rerun the gem install the other direction. But what are people's thoughts?
I'm looking forward to trying it. Our Puppet structure is such that Puppet spec doesn't work, and that's part of the reason why I want to go to modular Puppet, is because then we can get that in there and get that working and have some real unit tests on there.
Yeah, and that's another thing that's awesome with like Kitchen Puppet is you can resolve module dependencies with Librarian. So like even if you had a module specific repo that were testing just that module, and like let's say it depends on a different module to run, you can just call that in with Librarian Puppet, and it'll call in one of your own modules. So kind of in a way you could almost write like a wrapper cookbook, but there's no like concept of a wrapper cookbook in Puppet. You have to like call on that module and then add your stuff on top of it.
Well, I would actually beg to differ. I think we just call it something different. There was a post many moons ago. Let me go find it. This is where I find out that the site that I'm supposed to be maintaining isn't up. Let's go see. bestpractices.com. Sweet, it's still working. The role in profile modules. So a gentleman by the name of Craig Dunn did a talk, or wrote a blog post rather, back in 2012. Holy crap, I feel old. Talking about this idea of role and profile modules, and it fits kind of that wrapper cookbook idea. So what we're talking about here, for those that aren't super familiar with it, is this idea that you have a Puppet module that does like sets up Apache, and then another Puppet module that sets up PHP on top of Apache, and then another Puppet module that sets up your actual application, like the actual application code. You may have a role and profile module, so a role module might be web server, and that gives you all of the things that get that web server. And then you might have a production profile that also says not only do you get the web server, but you also get the monitoring, and oh, by the way, NTP is a thing, so you should have NTP.
Yeah, and Patrick was the first one that actually introduced me to that. Like I had no concept of like using profiles in our repo until Patrick actually went to PuppetConf, and we discovered profiles. And yeah.
Yeah. No, the profile idea is really interesting. I think there's still something lacking in a profile, though, because the concept of being gluable between pieces still requires that you have also requires that you have modules that are distinct and individual and things that you can rely on. When back to having everything in one module, right? Then profiles is kind of pointless.
Well,
anyway, go ahead.
So I think that some of this gets back to, and you know, as a Chef employee, this feels even odd to like talk about, but it gets back to kind of my personal journey from Puppet to Chef. Just that composability, where you run into silly things where it's like, I just need the ability to override this, and you end up in this place where it's really hard to properly expose kind of pass-through mechanisms where you're hitting other cookbooks and making changes, or just straight up overriding things in ways that you may or may not be able to. It's I don't know. Like that was a lot of kind of my personal journey away from Puppet, was this composability thought process, and how you can make those changes to the way that you build, the way that you think of Puppet or Chef as in the terms of a software development or a software project versus a actual just a set of rules that you execute.
Yeah, I think. Well, one of the things that I've been thinking about while I've been sitting here, kind of working on other stuff and kind of milling on making our Puppet more modular, is why we try to do so much logic in Puppet language. Why not extract that language, put it in the Puppet lib, the Ruby files, right? Do your logic in Ruby, and then just use the Puppet language for composition of those pieces.
Because it's scary. Like, I hate to say that, but like, so I mean, this is the thing, right? Like, and I to this day, like, I am. Hey, in fact, I've even got a pin that says I'm smart. Check this out.
Yeah, not focused.
You can't.
There
we go. Yeah, no, I'm actually Puppet certified, but of all the things, like, and to this day, I still kind of chafe at the idea of building custom types and providers. I've written custom functions, but it gets gnarly because where are you passing in the information? Where is that processing happening? And it's not it's not as natural of a feel where in Chef and like the Ruby environment, like you get to a point where you just start saying, screw it, I'm going to just write some helper methods, because that's what I need is helper methods. Like pass this in and do this thing, and it doesn't have as comfortable of a feel when you're doing when you write what is it called write functions and custom, and then you get into custom types and providers.
Yeah.
With that said, that there's no reason that you couldn't do that, and I would love to see more Puppet code written that way. Like now that I've seen the light of just using raw Ruby, I would probably, if I were to go write more Puppet code, I would probably write a lot more functions and a lot more custom types and providers.
I feel like you can protect yourself from a lot of oddity when writing custom types and providers by writing unit tests around it, right? So as long as you have that testing around it and you can trust that testing, then you should be able to create custom types and providers that won't, sit there with a snake in the grass waiting for your next mistake, right? And I also think that some of the scary part comes from our shared background of coming from scripting rather than software development, because every abstraction layer you add in a script, right, is like this giant point where things are just going to explode in your face.
Exactly.
But in software development land, that's you're all about, right, slicing those layers out. So I think it's just a fundamental philosophy difference between kind of that classic operations mindset and what software development is supposed to be.
To be fair, as I'm thinking about it, so I started with Puppet way long ago. Like I think the first version I deployed into production was 0.24.7.
Wow.
So like shortly, I've hit like those edge cases, right? Like if you want to go look at code that will make you cry, the VCS repo custom type and provider, at least 2 years ago when I looked at it, it was just like, and I hate to like talk crap on it because the person that did it, it made sense to them. They got it working for their use case. The one use case I always had, it never worked for. And when I went to go try and actually fix it, like I dug into the code, I could never get it. I could never get into the actual methods that I was seeing where I needed to be. Like I couldn't follow it through. I couldn't figure out how I was ever getting to where I thought I was. And some of that's the magic of the way that types and providers work. Some of that is probably I was just green behind the ears. But on the note of pins, while I'm thinking about it, because I saw it here, Jake, I've actually got from when I was in college, I decided it was a good idea to go get Sun certified. So this is a Sun certification for Solaris 9.
Wow. I wish they gave me a pin for that.
Are you going to do the DevOps certification?
Maybe. Like I actually
talking about that, but
yeah, I was. In fact, I was talking to my boss about that. I'm like, I think I'm going to go sit for the AWS exam, and we were talking about we both know how certs don't matter, but at the same time, they're kind of fun to go get, and it gives you that warm fuzzy when you get them, right? Like, yes, I am certified.
Well, it's weird, right? It's like when you're getting screened for a job, they don't matter. But when you're doing the actual interview, people are interested to see, oh, hey, look, right? You got this certification. We know you know that. But it's kind of this weird dichotomy, don't you think?
Like I'm like A+ computer certified or whatever that CompTIA certification thing is, and I don't think it's ever mattered. Like,
well. It's cultural capital, right? Like the fact that I am Puppet certified, frankly, has more of a discussion point because I work at Chef than it has to do with the fact that I'm actually Puppet certified, right? Like, no one has ever asked me, oh, because you are Puppet certified, do you know this thing? And it's no. It's more like, oh, check this out, dude. I took the test and I passed. and the same as with the AWS. Now, I will be straight with you. A side of me has been kind of wondering. So, I don't know how many of you are aware, but if you are insert shiny metal partner with Cisco, that there are actual requirements around how many people on your staff are have certain levels of Cisco certification. In fact, there are people that are CCIEs that make a living off of being someone on someone's payroll. Like they don't actually do any work there. They just happen to collect a paycheck from like 3 companies as being a CCIE on staff. Because in order to be, platinum, gold, silver, insert shiny metal certified, you absolutely have to have people on staff that are certified. So, a side of me is wondering, I wonder if that'll ever happen that way with AWS. And if it does, it would be cool to have the cert already.
Wow, that would be really bad for AWS, wouldn't it? I mean, look at the. I don't know. I mean,
it only matters to other vendors that are selling on top of AWS services. So, like, you don't have to have a CCIE on staff to buy Cisco. You have to have a CCIE to say you're a platinum partner to sell Cisco when you sell Cisco.
Okay, that makes more sense. Sorry, apparently I wasn't following, so.
No worries.
Yeah, it's just like hey, look at us, we have this piece of paper that says we know how to fix stuff when it breaks.
Very true. Although, I'm not going to lie, like, if you have a CCIE, totally, oh my God. I've never I've never taken the Cisco certification exams, but I know people that have sat for the CCIE and passed. That is a brutal exam. Like, holy crap.
It's very much a career path inside of itself.
Yeah.
At Org -1, I was like that close to starting on I was studying and everything else for the CCENT and about ready to take the CCNA and CCENT together. But I fortunately had a line of work change before that happened. But like Org -1 for me was a data center, so it was actually beneficial for me to actually have that knowledge.
Well, and I would tell you, did you study the books? Did you go through the initial course study?
No, I didn't study any of the books. There was a guy, I forget. He did a podcast of like studying for the CCNT and CCNA.
Okay, so you got the basic concepts, right?
Yeah.
That's awesome, because I will tell you the number of sysadmins that I've run into over the years that, like, I just wanted to walk in and hit them upside the head with the stupid Cisco book because they didn't understand how TCP worked. Like, I may be channeling my inner, like, BOFH there. I try and keep it away, but it does come out occasionally when people are not nice. So, but yeah, no, I that's exciting to hear because, like, the number of sysadmins that need to know about networking is becoming even more important because we're all doing networking stuff, especially with all this talk about microservices. It all of a sudden matters a lot more.
Right, because communication between those has to be spot on.
Well, and like the number of times I've walked in, well, it's the network problem. Or, like, I've walked into meetings. Oh, well, the network. Really? Come on now. Like, we're in a data center environment. We're not pushing the limits of anything. That it's not a network problem.
It's always DNS. Always DNS.
Okay, I will give you that. Although I will tell you, like, like, huge shout out to the Infoblox people because when I finally got to the point where I could go talk to an API, that was the end of that was endgame. Like, it was amazing because you could, like, oh, I need to set up a new box, and now we're all spoiled kids with things like Route 53 and Dynect, and I think DNS Simple has an API too. I should have a gray beard.
I was about to say, don't use DNS Simple's API. It's too simple. Seriously. It's not SSL. It's like, you want to transmit all your data in the clear, go ahead.
Really? That
Yeah.
seems like a gap.
Yeah.
That's no good. Yeah, I know. I will say I love Route 53 and use the heck out of it. In fact, I think my next project that I'm working on at work is going to do some Route 53 goodness.
The only thing with Route 53 is that the Boto API and the Java SDK API for Route 53 feels a little awkward. I mean, you have to make a transaction and things like that. I mean, otherwise, Route 53 is really nice to work with compared to Ultra or like Dyn or anything else.
I've just been programming in CloudFormation the Route 53 configs for my new environment. So
I haven't done any CloudFormation yet. I think I should probably sit down and do a little bit of that, especially if I want to get AWS certified.
prepare for some pain.
Well, it's lots and lots of JSON, isn't it?
That's
It is.
uh,
Yeah, it's a ton of JSON. My big complaint about it is that there's no validation outside of is it properly formatted JSON.
Also, I mean, with CloudFormation, like I was using CloudFormation, I think 2.5 years back. I don't know what's the state right now. Rollbacks are like really difficult. If you have anything really complex, like if you have EBS and then you have machines, you have ELBs and lots of other things, like like rolling back things takes a lot of time, and it's not so much deterministic. Sometimes it can just hang. Rather than that, like I've seen like other approaches, like things like what is it thing called Paletops or something, where they basically let you describe what is the state of your infrastructure, holistically, and then they apply the diffs similar to how like Puppet or Chef would do, like when they converge a node. I think that's much more like better than CloudFormation's rolling forward or rolling backward. I mean, that was like a big problem for me.
I feel like CloudFormation's probably a little better than that now. I haven't had any issues reverting nodes or reverting entire stacks of things, and the updates that I've tested so far seem to work pretty well.
I see.
Well, so I think there's a couple of things coming that direction, right? You've got things like HashiCorp's Terraform to help kind of go through that.
Yeah.
Chef has Chef provisioning, so if you're a Chef shop, the ability to just write recipes that stand up and build out nodes in the config language you're already using to configure your nodes, which becomes really interesting.
Yeah.
So those are things to definitely keep in mind.
I mean, at Netflix, like we use Asgard most of the times. Like, I mean, for all of our stuff, we use Asgard. But then, like, I know a lot of people basically what they have done is they write configuration of how their application is going to be, like in a YAML or something, and then they basically use Asgard APIs to apply the configuration which is in a file or source control, and basically like apply it onto like live environments. But I think the general direction is that, I mean, like have configuration maybe like which is a little better than a big ball of JSON in source control, and somehow apply it.
Well, I mean, I'm gonna take a different approach for just a second here. Like, we're always gonna bitch about that format, right? Like, whether it's XML, whether it's JSON, whether it's YAML, like, there's going to be one of us, or one group of us that bitches about it. One group of us, it's like, but it's way better than this other thing. Like that part. The format it's in is kind of irrelevant to me at this point, because I've just kind of assumed that they all suck and they're always going to suck because it's the nature of what we're doing. But instead, I liked your point, Patrick. That idea of it would be really nice to have a validator that went beyond just checking to see if it's valid JSON, and instead check to make sure that, oh, you're adding an EBS volume to an ELB. That's not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not always as straightforward as one would think to do. So,
well, as Depotno mentioned, Terraform actually has been something of interest to me. I just haven't really caught the time yet to sit down and play with it. I wanted to actually use it to kind of design and try to set up this environment that I've been working on, but I don't have the time to learn their language and figure out how it works and why or where it breaks and things like that. So sometimes there are great tools out there, but you just don't have the time to kind of pick up and run with it.
Yeah, I think that that's the truth. Is just I feel like we as an industry, like the nature of our industry is we continue to do this, and we're and it's funny because when you look at from any given point, we're always moving towards this vertical climb of how much faster we're accelerating, and it's insane. You used to be able to keep up with things, or at least a small number of things, and even I feel like I'm able to keep up with less and less as I get older. And I don't know if that's because I'm getting old. And my apologies to anyone out there that is looking at me and be like, "You youngin." Or if it's really just the nature of I wonder if it's because I'm aware of as many things as I am, right? Because of my age, I now know about how much is out there, and it's ballooning, if you will. So yeah, those are things that are kind of in the back of my mind as I'm thinking about my personal growth and how much I can learn, how quickly, and what should I be learning, right?
Well, it's also like a measure of technical debt as well. Like let's say we have service A and we're thinking about getting onto technology B. Well, the cost of learning technology B and getting it all set up and ready might be a whole lot more of just fixing technology A.
But B is so much more new and shiny.
Yeah, it's Docker. It's instant money.
Well,
Right.
This is actually, I think, so there was an episode of the Changelog recently where they were talking to the folks from who owns Passenger? What is it? Fusion. So Fusion Passenger, what they did is instead of releasing a new version of Passenger, they seeded out this new project, and I forget what they called it. But come to find out, they got tenfold the response by calling it, insert stealth project name, than by calling it Passenger 5. Like, no joke. And there were a few people that were like, oh, well, that's dishonest. Well, yeah, but new shiny, man. Like, that's a big deal.
Marketing 101, right?
Yeah.
Everybody always wants the new shiny. I mean, but I don't know. For me, at least, when it comes to like doing my job and trying to get it done, it's like what I know comes first, right? If I know it and I can do it in some sensible amount of time with what I already know, I'm probably not going to bother trying to take the time to pick up a brand new language such as Terraform and or a new technology.
That makes sense.
No, if I have the time, I love to do it. I mean, that's how I learned most of the things that I know. I learned on the job because they supplied a need, and the time that it would take me to do it manually or with the tools that I already knew would actually be greater than the time it would take me to learn this new technology and apply it.
Well, and I think that there's kind of this interesting quagmire where we get into of, as operations professionals, we tend to look at how the many ways this new thing can fail, and I think as developers frequently they're looking at all of the new and amazing things this thing can do. And it's not that either one is good or bad, it's just that weird balance of finding what makes sense for your environment, what makes sense for what you're doing, and it's not always cut and dry that going one direction or the other is the right direction.
Well, there's to top that off, there's also the KISS principle, right? So as you add more different technologies and things into your environment or whatever you're working or whatever your workspace is, right? It becomes more and more complex. It becomes more and more difficult to maintain and difficult to get people trained in on so that they can work quickly in that situation.
Well, and you run into this kind of weird situation on the flip side of it of like, how do I say this nicely? We live in this pie in the sky world a lot of times where it's like, oh, we're going to spin up this new service and it's going to get rid of these 3 other services. The reality is that we're going to spin up this new service and it needs to run in tandem with the other 3 services that are currently running because we aren't actually going to be able to migrate everything off of it. Hence the reason, like, there's still a ton of mainframes out there. And mainly because, so I worked at UC Riverside. They're still running a mainframe, and one of the big things it does is the human resources payroll system. There's no way to like lean startup that. Like you don't like build minimum viable products to replace the HRPPS system. Like it's just not a thing. And as a result, it becomes really hard to get rid of it because you get to a point where it's like, well, to replace this, we need to deploy this really big ass application, and we all know how that goes. In fact, if you don't, please let me know, and I will find you books to read because you will understand. Like you do a little bit of reading and see that large software projects fail like 50% of the time, something like that. It's ridiculous.
There was something I kind of wanted to talk with you about, Chris, and maybe get it out in the open. We had talked earlier once about freedom and like what you give to developers. Like, are you the shepherd of the developers saying, here is the land that you're allowed to play in? Do you write the tools? How much freedom do you give to like a new hire? And I think you had some good points on that. We were talking earlier.
Okay. Yeah, like that's a really interesting question, and I forget the exact conversation. Oh, we started with, well, what are you allowed to give them? Like, forget any of the self-imposed bullshit. Like, can developers have access to production based on these regulatory requirements, right?
Right. And it's like we have a lot of interns, and like we have access to production, but the tools are such a high barrier to entry. Like how low do we bring that barrier down to give them like a sense of freedom of, yeah, I can really damage stuff.
Well, and there's another aspect of this that, like, in a lot of cases, the rules be damned, right? Like, we invent and say, oh, well, because of regulatory requirements, we can't give this access out. Bull. You actually need to sit and look at what the compensating control is. I'm putting on my business hat for a second here. Does the policy make sense? Does the policy, could we put a different compensating control in place that gives other access? If developers shouldn't have access to the prod box because the developer shouldn't have access to the prod box, I wonder how much access the ops people should have to the prod box. Like, you start having that conversation, and it goes to places that we don't always want to go. And I will say, if you are in an environment where you're saying developers shouldn't have access to SSH into a box, then ops should probably have to go through a few hoops to get access to those keys too.
I actually agree with that. I haven't ever been in a situation where SSHing to a box wasn't required. But the thing that got stuck into my head some time ago was that if you've SSH'd to the box, you failed.
Well, exactly.
Yep.
And I mean, this
And that-
depends on your environment because I don't want to alienate some of our systems admins out there where that's how they have to operate because they don't really have a choice. To get to a point where you don't have to SSH to the box requires a lot of tooling. Like if you
Yeah.
you want to know what it means to get to that point, go look at the infrastructure that Netflix has built. Like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, it like I said, I've never actually been in an environment where SSHing into the box wasn't required. I'm hoping to get my current environment into that state, but it's a long road ahead.
well, and like with that said, like let's be straight. I'm sorry if I need to SSH in the box to introspect the state of the box. Guess what? The devs aren't any different. They need
Yeah.
to be able to get on the box and run the damn Rails console so that they can figure out what the box is actually doing because there may be some piece of data sitting in your production database that got there because Lord knows, and it's always the persistence problem, right? Like the hard part of systems, like migrating systems over time, is not spinning up a new web server. Like, okay, if you are at a point where your web servers can sit in a load balancer rotation and you can take one out without any impact, cool, that's awesome. But guess what? You probably can't do that with your database. And since you can't do that with your database, you probably need to be able to introspect the running production data. Now, there are things you can do to make it safer. One of our wonderful friends, Pete Cheslock, is working over with ThreatStack to make that better. But like, it just has to. You have to look at what makes sense for your organization. If you are in regulatory environments, the way you get access probably is more confined. But at the same time, make your ops people go through the same process because guess what? Your devs, if everybody has to go through that process, it will get better because you'll figure it out because no one wants to go through that process.
Yeah, it's called eating your own dog food.
Exactly. And like I'm gonna be straight up. Like, have I absolutely been the exception to the rule? Well, hell yeah. When I was in college, how many people think it's a good idea for a student to have root level access on the student information system? Probably not many. It was a thing. It
Well,
had
you
to
need-
be done.
You just need to see what your ex-girlfriend was doing, right?
And you know what? I'm going to say this now because it drives me nuts. If you are a sysadmin and you are browsing people's fucking email, like, you are so breaking all of you're ruining it for the rest of us. So please stop.
Right. And as like a college kid, like that's exactly what like somebody would have done, right? Like, there's no.
Well,
I don't think there's any like growth of like ethical consciousness at that age.
I would disagree because I think that most high schoolers, by the time they leave high school, should understand those kind of ethics. And right, you shouldn't hand someone the keys to the kingdom that doesn't understand those ethical quandaries and understand the right way. As a student, absolutely, I was a mail administrator. I had the ability to go read the president of the university's email. Did I? No. I had no reason to. Like, I'm sure, did I touch the mailbox? I'm sure, because I moved things around, because that's what you did as a mail administrator. You said, oh, we need to move these 50 mailboxes over from here to here. Okay, no big deal, and we did it. But it's all about ethics, and we don't hear about it as much, but I would challenge anyone that hasn't seen them already, that considers themselves a DevOps engineer, systems administrator, yada, yada, yada. Lopsa and the Usenix Sage group, which is now the Usenix Lisa group, many years ago put together a code of ethics for systems administrators. In fact, when I worked at UCR, I actually had a copy of it printed and hung on my wall in like big-ass poster form. But I challenge everyone, if you haven't seen that, if you haven't committed to following that, you really should, because it's absolutely what matters. We really, the only thing we have as systems administrators is our ethics and our trust, because at the end of the day, if you're not the production SRE handling the application, even then you're handling people's data. If you're an IT systems administrator, you have access to all of it, and it's all about ethics, because someone's got to have that access. Someone's got to be responsible for it. So we have to make sure that we are holding ourselves accountable to the highest level of scrutiny. I'll take off my hat of, I guess maybe less about hat and get off of my soapbox. So we are coming up on the end of the hour now that I've sat and ranted about ethics and systems administration.
Well, I think it's all applicable to any position, right? Like even a developer, if a systems administrator or a DevOps engineer, or whatever their title is, gives you trust over the production environment, right? You have to respect that trust, just as the same as if users give you the data from your HipChat logs or your Slack logs.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same amount of trust, but the developers are respecting the environment, and the administrators are respecting the personal environment of everybody else.
Exactly. It's about trust. Trust.
Ethics and DevOps.
Ethics and DevOps. I'm going to get myself in trouble now. But no, in all honesty, it really is about trust, like more than anything. So if you get a chance, I'll throw this out here for this week. I just read the fifth discipline by someone. I will go find it. Where's the AWS? Or not AWS, the Amazons.
Right, I think that's what your final point was. We're not giving developers like freedom. We're giving them trust and allowing them to run with that trust, and like using trust as a object. Like, here's this ball of trust for production.
Well, okay, so granted that there is some ethics to it, but when you can trust people to be ethical to a certain extent, okay, but you can also trust people to make mistakes. And part of restricting some kinds of access to a system is not so much about that you don't trust the person or that department, but that you know that people will make mistakes, and you want to insulate your systems from those, right, as much as possible, rather than saying, well, all developers will suck at this and will totally break it if they had a chance, right? I've never thought that about anyone or any group, but I've definitely said, well, if you didn't quite understand why this was set this way, you might set the wrong thing, right? And then protect that thing so that I can keep people who may not know how to manage it from trying to manage it. Does that make sense?
But exactly, and I go back to my previous statement. The same applies to the ops people as it does the developers, because they're just as likely to make those mistakes.
No. I'm saying that I would put protections around that for everyone, right, and including myself.
Exactly. With that said, I was wrong. It's not the book. It's the book, The Fifth Discipline, is awesome, but that's about learning organizations. Simon Sinek has some interesting stuff about trust in organizations and trusting people. So that's my pick, if you will, for the week. Go watch Simon Sinek. If you don't understand people, you don't understand business, on the YouTubes. With that, guys, awesome discussion today. I do want to say my theme this year is going to be talking about trust, because I think the more I think about it, that didn't make sense, but the more I think about it, trust really, we've kind of figured out we need to be empathetic. So I think the next part of this discussion is we need to trust people. We need to have faith and be able to say, yes, I know my coworker, I trust my coworker, and the only way that they're going to be successful is if I trust them, and the only way I'm going to be successful is if they trust me, and vice versa. So with that,
Cool.
Y'all have a great week.
Nice
I
to
guess
meet you.
my quick little pick for the week is you brought up some about empathy, and I saw a quick little short. It's like a 2-minute video on empathy versus sympathy, a little RSA animated short.
Oh, awesome.
I'm gonna put that link in Hangouts, but definitely must watch.
Awesome. Thank you much, Jake.
Mhm.
All right, we'll talk to everybody later.